Thank you all for being here. Today, we are going to have our webinar. This is the next webinar in 2 weeks is going to be the last one in 2022. So don't forget to be there in 2 weeks. Today, we have the pleasure to receive Josefa Aguirre. She will present her working paper. I'll talk about Josefa a little bit, okay? And then she'll start her presentation. So Josefa studied her PhD in economics education at Columbia University. Her research explores policy-relevant questions in the field of applied microeconomics. Her particular areas of specialization are in the economics of education, the labor market, and gender economics. She works at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. Today, she's presenting Joining the Old Boys Club, Women's Returns to Majoring in Technology Engineering. Hi, Josefa.
Hi, Lorena. Thank you for having me.
Hi, it's a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Okay, so I'll start. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so everyone can see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, well, thank you again for inviting me and for joining today. As Lorena said, I will be presenting this paper that's called Joining the Old Boys Club. And this is joint work with Juan Mata and Ana Maria Montoya. So feel free to interrupt me anytime, especially if something is not clear. So, okay, so let me start by motivating this paper. So what I first want to show you is something that you all probably already know, which is that there's a lot of segregation, gender segregation by field of study. So what we have here is using data from Chile, which is what we use in this paper. We have the percentage of students who enroll in each field of study who are women. So as you can see here, roughly 70% of those who enroll in education or health are women, and just 23% of those who enroll in technology and engineering are women. Now, this uses data from Chile, but the figure looks quite similar in other countries, including, for instance, the US. So what I really want to highlight with this figure is that technology and engineering really stands out as a very male-dominated field. So if you look at business, half of the students are women. Even if you look at science, so science has life sciences that actually tend to be more female-dominated. But even if you were to look at math or statistics, you would see that they are more gender-balanced than technology and engineering. So technology and engineering is really an exception. Now, why do we care about this? So why do we care about the fact that we have so few women in technology and engineering? Now, we might care about this for a number of reasons. So we care that we might be losing human capital. So maybe great women that would be great at technology and engineering and are not going there. But we also care about this because technology and engineering pays really well. So, and this is what this second figure here is showing. So here we have in the x-axis, you have students' math test scores. This is also using data from Chile. And on the y-axis, you have their average earnings when they are roughly 35 years old. So the red line right here is showing average earnings for individuals who studied technology and engineering. The blue line right here is showing average earnings for those who studied what we call HAS. This would be humanities, arts, social sciences. This is basically every other field aside from business and health. And you can see that regardless of the math test score, people in technology and engineering tend to have much higher earnings. This is true for men. For women, the figure looks a little bit different. So it seems that earnings are much higher for women in technology and engineering who have high math test scores. Now, most of the women that go into this field tend to have like high math test scores. So you kind of see that this is a field that pays really well. Health and business are other fields that also have high earnings. Now, business is really gender balanced and health tends to be more female dominated. And I also put here science, because science is right in between. I just want to emphasize why we focus on technology and engineering and not STEM, which is kind of what's many times done, because technology and engineering is much more male dominated and also tends to be high earning. So science, like life sciences, math, statistics, is not that male dominated and also does not have always like very high earnings. Okay, but let me get back to the question. So we know that TE pays really well. So we have, this is obviously not causal evidence, but we have this sense that maybe if we had more women go into technology and engineering, we would increase earnings for them and perhaps even reduce the gender wage gap. Now, that's just one side of the story. So the other side of the story that I would like to highlight is this more recent research that highlights the many barriers that women face when they actually do go into very male-dominated fields. So this research that suggests that women have a harder time graduating from STEM than men. There are some recent papers that say that women might have trouble negotiating or networking in very male-dominated environments. There's also this research by Claudia Goldin that highlights the possibility that, well, women value flexibility a lot, and the possibility that getting this flexibility might be particularly costly in certain occupations. So this could be the case in technology and engineering, and also the possibility that women might face more discrimination. So I just want to say that we really don't know. So this is a very high earning field, but it's also very, very male dominated. So it could pose a number of barriers for women who actually do go into technology and engineering. And this is where we want to contribute with this paper. So what we do is that we want to estimate the causal effect of going into technology and engineering for men and women. So we will be comparing the effect of studying a program in technology and engineering as opposed to HAS. So as I said before, HAS would be humanities, arts, social sciences, all these other fields that tend to be, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but more female dominated or gender balanced and lower earnings. So we care about this margin. We think it's particularly relevant because if we wanted to increase earnings for women, we would like to switch them from these low earning degrees into technology and engineering, not so much from business to TE, because they are already sort of in this high earning path. I'll also have a word on health and business later, but this is what we will be looking at, going from these more low earnings fields into technology and engineering. And to do this, we use data from Chile. We exploit the fact that in Chile, you apply to specific majors within institutions. So you would apply, for instance, to engineering at Universidad Católica, not just Universidad Católica. And whether you get, there's a centralized admission system. So whether you get admitted or not will depend on how well you do on a test. So this will allow us to implement a regression discontinuity design, which is something that other authors have already done. And we will be looking at individuals who have, for instance, engineering as a more preferred choice, and whose next best alternative is a program in architecture, sociology, education. And we might also have people who are applying the other way around. So I might be applying to sociology first and engineering at a less selective institution second. So we will be using these people to run an RD. So I'll obviously look at the results more in detail later, but just to give you a general picture of what we find, we see that being admitted into TE, enrolling in TE, makes a big difference for men. So when men get admitted into TE as opposed to HAS, they increase their earnings by 46% and their employment by 12%. But we have no effect for women. So in terms of earnings, women are really the same, whether they study psychology, education, or engineering. Now, when we look at other fields, so we also look at business and health, we kind of see another different pattern. So we see that health and business, as opposed to HAS, they both have a positive return. And this is positive for men and women. So it's stronger for men, but still quite positive and significant for women. So this big difference that we find, and the fact that we find null returns for women, seems to be something specific about technology and engineering. And we think it has to do with the fact that this is a very male-dominated environment. So we do a number of things to try to understand what is really happening here. We sort of find that men and women that go into technology and engineering follow very different career paths. So we see that going into technology and engineering opens a lot of doors for men. They are more likely to work in certain sectors of the economy, mining, construction. They're more likely to work in very high-paying firms, but also firms that are very male-dominated with very few women in leadership positions, and also firms that tend to be located further away from their houses. So women are not getting access to this kind of jobs. Now, this could be a matter of not wanting to, not being able to, but we sort of see that they are not following these career paths, and that could explain why they are not getting a return. When we look at fertility, we don't see an effect on fertility. So going into one field or another does not affect whether women have children or when they have children. Now, that's not to say this has nothing to do with childbearing. So we find evidence that is consistent with the idea that the child penalty might be particularly strong for women in technology and engineering, and that returns of going into this field might be particularly low for women once they have children. And finally, we conducted an online survey. So I also talk about those results. We had a low response rate. So this has a lot of problems, all the problems that a survey might have, like online. But there are some results that are interesting. In particular, we find that women that go into technology and engineering are much more likely to report that they have felt discriminated upon. So much more than women that go into business or health. So this is a particularly difficult field for women. And this is sort of everything is consistent with this idea that women do face a number of barriers when they go into technology and engineering. And I think the paper makes a nice point that in some cases, these barriers might be so high that it could not even be profitable for women to actually go into technology and engineering. Okay, so let me describe a little bit the setting and the data. So how the system works in Chile is that students graduate from high school. They then take a test. And if they want to apply to university, they have to apply to specific majors within institutions, as I said before, so engineering at a specific institution, and half of the institutions participate in a centralized admission system. So how it works is that you give this test and then you submit a ranking of alternatives. So you would say, I want engineering here, maybe my second choice is also engineering at a different institution, third choice, architecture, and so on. And the system will apply a deferred acceptance algorithm. So whether you get admitted or not depends on how well you did on this test. And we will have specific cutoffs for each program. And this will vary depending on the demand and the slots that you have each year. The data that we will be using, so we have a very rich data.
Can I do a quick question?
Yes, of course.
This test is direct to public and private universities or only public? Because here in Brazil we have a standard for public and all others for private.
No, this is have the universities participate in this centralized admission system, and this includes both public and private institutions. The universities that do not participate tend to be a little bit less selective, although you also have not very selective institutions that are in the system. And everyone gives this test because even if you're not applying to these institutions, this test is a requirement in order to get public funding. So most people do take the test. And okay, so in terms of the data, we have for all students in Chile, we have all of their educational records. how well they did on the test, where they applied to, where they enrolled, whether they graduated, and so on. This is important. We focus on students who graduated from high school between, who started college actually between 2000 and 2008. So these were the oldest cohorts for whom we could gather all these records. So these students are at most 38 years old the last time we see them. And we have information, so to the educational records, we add data on earnings. This comes from the unemployment insurance. So this includes everyone that's working in the formal sector. We add what the unemployment insurance does not include the public sector, but we add that ourselves. So we have data for the public sector for 2018 and 19, and most of the results that I'll show you are using this records from 2018-19. And what we're missing is actually the self-employed. So this would be about 15% of individuals are self-employed, and those we don't get to see. And we also have administrative records, fertility and marriage records. And finally, we have this survey that we designed and administered. So we designed the survey and sent it to everyone who had graduated from any of the programs that we were studying in this period. Now, we did get we have 4,000 responses, but this is a very low response rate considering how many people graduated in this period. Okay, so let me go a little bit more into detail in how we construct our sample and how our identification strategy. So we will be comparing the effect of being admitted to a program in technology and engineering as opposed to HAS. So in this figure, each dot is a specific program. The x-axis is showing the percentage of students who enroll in that program who are female, and the y-axis is showing average earnings for individuals in that program. So while there's some variance, you can see that programs in technology and engineering tend to be very male-dominated and high earnings. So this includes we use their OECD category, so we don't categorize this ourselves. This includes construction, industry and production, computing, and engineering. So we'll be comparing the effect of being admitted to any of these degrees as opposed to what we call HAS. Now, HAS includes public administration, architecture, art, social science, education, humanities, journalism, personal services, social services. And you can see that what's common across these programs is that they tend to be lower earning, and they are either gender balanced or more female dominated. Okay, so we have two cases that we can exploit. We have students who have TE as a more preferred alternative. So as I explained before, you might apply to engineering first and maybe, I don't know, education second or sociology second. And if you cross the threshold, then you get admitted into TE. You also might apply the other way around. So you might have architecture as a more preferred choice and maybe computing as a second alternative. So we will be using both of this to estimate the effect of being admitted into TE. So we ran a very standard regression discontinuity design. What's a bit different is that we redefine our cutoff crossing indicator so that it's always 1 if you're admitted into TE. Okay, so we use both of these cases in our regression. I can show you that the results remain the same just to gain power, but they remain the same if we run a separate regression for those who have TE as a more preferred alternative and those who have it as a less preferred alternative. But in our main specification, so TE equals 1 if you're admitted into TE. This is the case if you cross the threshold and this was your more preferred choice, or you missed the threshold and this was your least preferred choice. So this is a standard specification. It's very flexible. We allow the slope of the running variable to vary depending on gender and also on the program that's the program you're applying to. And we include program, year, and gender fixed effects. Now, we run, this is the reduced form specification. Many of the results I'll show you come from the IV, where we use whether you're admitted or not into a T program, as an instrument for whether you actually enroll. So not everyone that gets admitted enrolls. So you might be admitted to a degree in engineering and choose to go to a private university outside the system. But it's a very strong first stage. I mean, being admitted to a program increases your probability of going by 60 percentage points.
Josefa?
Okay. Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier that, as we know, in the Chilean system, we can rank similar fields, like in different preferences, like we can apply for engineering in the first, second, and third alternative. And then let's say, for example, in the fourth one, we apply to HAS. How do you treat when consecutive preferences are ranked in the same, let's say, technology and engineering field? Like,
yeah, that's a very good question. So we are actually only, and I can show you the graph later, but we'll be only focusing on people who are in the margin of being admitted to TE or HAS. This means that there's obviously actually a lot of people are very consistent. So they will always apply to engineering. I apply to engineering in University A, my second choice, University B, C. That person would not be in our sample. Because if he crosses, there's like, he will never not study engineering. So it's difficult to build a counterfactual for them. So yes, and that's, I guess, one of the maybe limitations. Our sample is sort of constrained to those people who apply across fields. So I can show you at the end, I have a table that shows that a lot of people are really consistent. Now, applying to technology and engineering and HAS is not really a very rare choice. It is kind of rare to apply across fields, though. A lot of people just apply always T. Yes, so then if you, for instance, apply to engineering and your last alternative HAS, you might be in my sample if you're close, because you have to be close to the threshold. So if you're in the margin of being admitted, then you would be in the sample because of this variant application. Okay, so let me go into the results. So right here we have like the RD graph. How this is set is that to the left you have individuals who missed the threshold and were assigned to HAS. These are residualized earnings, and to the right, you have individuals who were admitted to technology and engineering, and you see that when men cross the threshold, you see this increase in their earnings. Instead, for women, you don't see any difference in their earnings when they are admitted to technology and engineering. Now, this table shows results from the IB. So this is the effect of being admitted into technology and engineering. It's probably worth explaining what you're seeing here because all the tables look kind of the same. So in the first row, you have the effect of enrolling in TE for men. So for instance, enrolling in TE as opposed to HAS increases their probability of working by 9 percentage points and their average earnings by $6,000. For women, you see a negative effect that's not significant in the probability of working and a very small effect on their earnings. That's $500, not significant. And below that, you see the difference between both groups just to show that this is statistically significant, like the difference. And below, you can see the mean earnings for men and women who enrolled in HAS. So you can see that enrolling in TE increases the probability of working and earnings for men. To the right, you have the probability that you earn between $0 and $15,000 and so on. And you see a big increase in the probability that they earn above $40,000 a year, which would be in the 95th percentile in terms of earnings. So a big increase in the probability that they're kind of at the top and no effect for women. So you see that women are not increasing their earnings, and you see that they are not getting access to this very top of the earnings distribution, which would be consistent with this sort of glass ceiling hypothesis. Now, those were the effects where individuals were, this is data from 2018-19, which is like when we have more complete records on earnings. Here we see how this evolves throughout time. So This is also coming from the RD. The blue line is showing our estimated earnings for instance, men who enrolled in HAS, and the red line is estimated earnings for men who enroll in TE. And this is also coming from the RD, and this is when they have been 10 up to 20 years after high school, so up to 35, 38 years old. Now, the shade is showing the 95 confidence intervals. It gets noisier because we only get to observe, for instance, one cohort when they are 38 years old. So that's why it becomes more noisy. But you kind of see that there's this positive effect that's constant throughout this time period that we are seeing. And we see no effect for women. This is never significant. You do see that it gets a bit positive, but not significant between 12 and 18 years after high school, and it starts to get more negative at the end. So I wouldn't overinterpret this, but this would be consistent with this sort of this idea that this might get more negative as women start having children, but it's always not significant at 0. Okay, so let's look at other fields. So this would be business and health. So what happens when men and women go into business and health, which are also high earning, but are not that male dominated. So here we have the same figure as before. Each dot is a program. You see that programs in business tend to be very high earning, but very gender balanced. Programs in health tend to be very female dominated and higher earnings too. This cloud you see kind of at the top, that's probably degrees to become a physician, so a doctor. And what you see is that there's a very positive return of going to business as opposed to HAS for men, but also positive for women. So it's stronger for men, but quite positive for women too. And you also see the same for health. So health also increases earnings for men, for women and for men, although it's stronger for men, which is something that you could see coming, considering that men work more, are more likely to work. So this seems to be something like unique about technology and engineering. So we look at a number of mechanisms, sort of try to understand why is it that women are not getting these big returns when they go into technology and engineering. We first look at graduation because I'm showing you the effects of enrolling in technology and engineering. So one concern is maybe these women do not graduate. So here we look at a number of outcomes, whether you graduate from college. It doesn't affect whether you graduate from college because everyone here is going to college. Most people are going to one alternative or the other. There's no effect on whether you graduate on time, slight decrease, which is pretty consistent with the fact that people take longer to complete a degree in TE. And more importantly, when you look at the probability that they graduate from TE, you see that there's a big increase for men and women. It's not one because not everyone graduates. You also have some people in the control group that eventually graduate from TE. They might attend another university and eventually switch to a degree in TE or attend a private university. But the important takeaway here is that graduation, the effect on graduation does not look different for men and women. Now here, and there's a lot of information in this figure, but here we're looking at the probability that you work in different sectors of the economy. So the blue line, the blue bars here are showing, for instance, the probability that you work in construction for men who enroll in HAS. So that's kind of high. And the red dot is this probability if they enroll in technology and engineering. So you see, for instance, a big jump in the probability that they end up working in the construction sector. Now, how the sectors are organized in this figure is construction is the sector that's more male dominated, like most of the individuals that work here are men. And to the other side, the other extreme, you have health services. Public sector is here, but just because we don't have data for the on gender of all workers of the public sector. So health would be the most female dominated. And you see there's a significant increase when they go into TE of working in construction and mining. And also information and communication. So certain sectors, and a lot of them like really male dominated, such as construction and mining. Construction is quite remarkable, like 15% of men that go into TE work in construction. Women, they do not increase their probability of working in construction nor mining. a little bit on information and communication. And although the probability of working in education decreases, it's still quite significant. So a lot of these women are still working in education, although they went into technology and engineering. We next look at the characteristics of the firms where they are employed. So here you have, for instance, for men, the blue bar would equal to 1 if they work at a firm where less than, for instance, the first bar would be the probability that you work in a firm where less than 10% of workers are women, or between 20 and 36% of workers are women. So you see an increase when they go into T in the probability of working in a firm where less than 36% of workers are women. So they are going, this increasing employment is coming mainly from, and there's also like some switching, because you see a decrease in the probability that they work in these very female-dominated firms, and they are more likely to go into these more male-dominated firms. And the pattern looks kind of different for women, so you don't see such an increase in the probability that they are going into these very male-dominated firms. Now, we also look at, we don't have information on occupations, so we just have information on earnings for everyone who works at the firm. But what we do is that we, in order to see how many women you have in leadership positions, what we do is that we take the 5 people that are earning like the highest earnings in the firm. So we say that they are in charge, like that's the assumption, which I think is kind of reasonable. So we look at how many women you have among the 5 highest earnings within a firm. And here is the probability that you work at a firm where, for instance, there's no woman within this like highest earnings, and you see that men are more likely when they enter T to go into a firm where less than 20% where you have less than 20% of women in these leadership positions. And again, women are not increased by that much, their probability of going into these very male-dominated firms. Lastly, we look at where the firm is employed. So this is the probability that you work, that your firm is, where you're working is in the same region where you grew up. So we take the region and province where individuals went to high school. And we see a lot of men work in the same region where they grew up, but going into T increases the probability that they work in a different region. Yeah. Next, we see province. A province is a smaller unit than a region, and you also see an increase in the probability that you work in a different province. So going into T makes this difference for them. They are going into these different kind of sectors, more likely to work further away, and women are not really increasing significantly their probability of working in a different region or a different province, and they are much less likely to work further away, which is something that a lot of papers have reported in the past. Next, we look at fertility. So if you want to see like any effect, like gender effect, you obviously always need to look at children, because this is a big issue for women. Here we look at whether you have a child at each age for men and women. This is also coming from the RD. The blue line again is our estimated probability for individuals that go into HAS, and the red line is the probability for individuals who enroll in technology and engineering. So you don't see much of a difference for men, nothing is statistically significant. This is the probability that you have a child when 1 year after high school up to 18 years after high school. So this is when you're like 36 years old, I guess, 37. and nothing for women. So by the time they are like 37 years old, like roughly 70 or 65% of women have had a child, but you don't see an effect of going into T on when you have children. Which I think in itself is quite interesting, because you see that going to one field or another, you can look at health, business. In general, it does not affect the timing of fertility for women. Okay, so next we look at marriage. So a lot of people might think that maybe there's a big return in the marriage market. So this is like a common hypothesis that women maybe are marrying someone that has much higher earnings. Their earnings are typically thought like as the second earning within the family. So maybe my spouse or partner earns like a big salary. I choose not to work myself or opt out. So we look at this. The data that we have is not perfect to look at the marriage market, but I'll show you what we can do. So in the first column, we look at whether you have a child, which is what I showed you before. And we don't see an effect in the probability that you have a child, nor in the probability that you get married. Like 50% of individuals have a child and 30% and a little bit less than 30% unmarried. We then define that you have a partner if you either are married or have a child. So we'll say your partner is either your spouse if you have a spouse or the father of your first child. So by this definition, roughly 50% of individuals in our sample have a partner. Then we go and we want to know something about this partner. And this is where it gets a bit tricky because we can only know something about your partner if he's young enough. So if you married or if your spouse is older, then we don't have their educational records or their earnings. So we only observe this like huge data set for relatively young people. So we get to observe something about your partner for a little bit more than 30% of individuals in a sample. So if you look at column 5, you see we lose a lot of our observations. Now going into TE does not affect the probability that we do observe your partner, but it's still, we lose a lot of people because we don't know who, maybe they don't have a partner, or it's an older partner and we can't see anything about the partner in our data. Now, for those whom we can identify a partner, we don't see that going into TE, it means you marry someone that, for instance, scores much higher in the math nor in the language test. So then we see at whether you marry someone from your program, and we see that there's a big jump here. So if you study engineering at University A, it's actually much more likely that you marry someone from engineering at University A. Now, it does not affect your probability of marrying an engineer in general. And that's something that other papers have also found. Like there's this paper by Magne Mogstad, working paper, that gets to the same conclusion, which is that you're more likely to marry someone that attended your same specific program. But if you're an engineer, it's not like you're more likely to marry any engineer. For women, you actually see a negative effect on, so there's some substitution. You marry someone from your specific program, but you're less likely to marry an engineering from University B. So in the end, there's like an increase in the probability that you end up marrying with an engineer, but it's not that huge. And we don't see that you're marrying someone with much higher earnings. So it has its limitations, but at least from what we have, we don't see that this is very consistent with the idea that you're marrying someone that has much higher earnings, and that's why you're not working. We then look. Yes.
Sorry, I have a question. You have positive associative matching in marry someone of your own profession,
or of your own profession and university.
And university. Okay.
So it's really the people you meet, like your peers, but not that you're more likely to marry like your own profession.
Okay. It's just because you are attending the same classes.
Yeah, so it increases the probability you marry someone from that class, but not like someone from the same profession in general. Okay. And that's consistent with what other papers have found.
Yes. The same in Brazil also.
Yes. And okay, so then we look at the child penalty. Now the data is also not perfect to look at for doing like the child penalty graph, because these are relatively young people and we don't get to observe them. You would like to observe them like 20 years later or something. But I think it's still an interesting exercise because we know specifically what they studied. So here we have this, we're getting like, we're leaving the RD aside, and we're just taking, for instance, all men and women who enrolled in HAS. And we see what happens around the birth of their first child. So if you've seen this graph before, what this is showing is your earnings. So at the moment that right before and right after the child is born. So what you typically see is in these graphs is that once you control for this like age and year fixed effects, you see that earnings don't really change for men. And for women, you see this decrease in their earnings. For women in HAS, you see a child penalty that's close to the 20%. Now, for women in TE, this is stronger and it's closer to 30%. Now, when we look at business and health, it's not perfect. It's not the nicest graph that you would like to see, but still you kind of see this pattern. It's kind of flat for men and close to 20% child penalty for women in business, and the same in health. So it seems that the child penalty is stronger for women that studied technology and engineering. Another thing that we do is that we look at women with and without children. Now, having children is endogenous, so that's obviously always a problem. We don't see an effect on your probability of having children, which makes us a little bit more confident about doing this exercise. But what you're seeing here is the effect of enrolling in TE for women with and without children. Nothing is significant, but you see a positive effect for women with no children, not significant, but still positive, and negative for women with children. And in particular, a significant decrease in the probability that they work. So this would mean that going into TE decreases the chances that you keep on working once you have children. So yes. And the same is not true for women without children. So that this might be a particularly hard profession to like keep going if you have children. Survey evidence. So we conducted a survey. As I said before, we sent an online survey to all students who attended like any of the institutions that were in the centralized admission system. This is a huge group of individuals, so we have 4,000 responses, about 4,000. It's a really low response rate considering how many people received our email. But still, I think there are some things that are interesting. So here I'll just put a little bit of some of the few questions that we asked. So for instance, my gender has played against me in the job searching. So just 7% of men say this is true, 35% of women. But what's most interesting is that women that went into technology and engineering, 50% say that their gender has played against them. And this is much lower for women in HAS, quite strong for women in business, but less strong for women in health. Now, I am willing to make sacrifices to reach high-level positions. You see that 50% of men actually do agree with this statement. Women, it's a little bit less, 40%. Now, you see that 52% of women in TE agree with this statement. So women in TE are kind of more career-oriented than are other women. So they do place like a lot of value on their career. Now, when you ask about discrimination, we asked whether you have ever felt discriminated upon, for instance, in terms of promotion at work. We asked like an open question. We didn't say because of your gender, so people might feel discriminated for a number of reasons. We see that, in fact, almost 40% of men say they have felt discriminated upon in terms of promotions, but this figure is much higher for women, 55%. And what's more interesting is that for women in TE, this is 65%. So all these numbers are much higher for women in technology and engineering. They are more likely to say they have felt discriminated for promotion, earnings 66%, and development opportunities 57%. Here I'm just putting a few of the ones that stood out the most, but the pattern is quite consistent that discrimination seems to be much more of a problem for women in technology and engineering. Now, this is a survey and we have low response rates, but there are other papers that have shown similar patterns. For instance, in the US, where women are much more likely to say that they have felt discriminated in this engineering sectors. So in general, what our findings are telling us is that enrolling in these high earning and male dominated fields increases employment and earnings for men, but not for women. We believe this has a lot to do with the fact that men and women follow very different career paths. So in the end, women are not getting access to these very high paying jobs in technology and engineering. We obviously need more research in other contexts. This is an RD, so results are local in nature. We're looking at people who are in the margin of meeting into technology and engineering. But I think it makes an important point, and I think in the sense that we have more and more literature, more recent literature that has highlighted all the barriers that women face in this very male-dominated environment. We're able to show that at least in this scenario, for these women that are close to the margin or whatever, it's even not like it's not even profitable for them to go into these fields. So when we see that so few women go into technology and engineering, maybe it's not that surprising. So it's maybe not an irrational choice. It's not just about lacking information. It's also true that as it is, it's very hard to advance within these environments. Now, in terms of like public policy, our message is obviously not, let's not go into technology and engineering, but rather how do we overcome these barriers, and how it's not just about if we had more women go into technology and engineering, maybe this will start making a difference, but we also need to adjust some things in the labor market so that this is not too difficult for women who are actually now following this path. So that's it.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you have any questions or
Any questions?
Hi, Josefa. I have one question. Is it possible, and if you think it makes sense, to, in looking at your data, and check whether you can find some sort of heterogeneous effects in the type of technology and engineering programs in the data? Because I was thinking that maybe, I don't know, enrolling or applying to a technology and engineering field in a top university maybe is different than applying to a less selective university. And right now, as if I understand this correctly, like we are aggregating like all of these possible type of programs from different type of selective universities in the same broad category of TE, right? So I don't know if that's a possible heterogeneous effect to check, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So I have two things to say about that. So and I have some results. So the first one would be that you might even be concerned that men and women are not applying to the specific same program. So maybe men are applying to a very selective, most of the men in our sample are applying to more selective and women less selective, or men's counterfactual is maybe, I don't know, art that pays really low, and woman, I don't know. So we do an exercise where we do sort of a matching exercise just to make sure that that's not what's happening, and we find the same results if we use males distribution. That is, we match women who apply to the same programs as men. So we have like the same distribution and results look the same. Now, I think you were pointing to something different, and if you use the same female distribution, you get the same results. So it's not that they are applying to different degrees within this like broad categories. Now, a different thing is whether we find some heterogeneous effects. So what we do is we look at how this the effect for men with different math test score deciles, that would be, it's not specifically what you were suggesting, which is a good idea, elite versus non-elite, but it's quite correlated. You would expect that those with higher math test scores are applying to more selective TE programs. And I think there's something, it's not significant, but there's something interesting here. You kind of see the effect is positive for men, regardless of their math test score of going into TE. For women, it's not significant, but a bit more positive for women with higher math test scores. So, and I think there's something there in the figure that it showed at the beginning. It seems that TE is a particularly bad choice for women who have low math test scores. And you kind of see that in the descriptive data. So here we're obviously focusing on women who are in this margin, and that's a specific margin, which is the ones that are applying to different across fields. So yes, so so it could look different for this super high performing woman, and maybe for women who are applying just engineering, like are super focused. I still think it's interesting, and that's why I would be cautious in how you interpret these results. It's not that this is a bad choice for every woman, but it is for those who are probably at the margin of being admitted into TE, which is interesting because these are just the women who would hope to move into technology and engineering. These are the kind of women you're trying to bring in, and for them it's not a very good choice, but there might be like heterogeneous results over there.
Any other question?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Mariana. I'm a PhD student here at CEDEPLAN. I'm working with Simone. So we are working exactly at this subject as well, but focusing more on labor market results and outputs. And one of our first questions was why you chose technology and engineering, but you answered this question in the beginning of your presentation. But now I have a question regarding the HES area. I mean, if this is not, if you're not putting together a lot of different areas, and this can somehow reduce the effect that among these areas. Do you understand? Or I don't know, if you try to disaggregate this big area, if you found any other relevant effect as well.
Yeah, so well, in terms of the first question, which I kind of answered, but still here is like how science looks like. So science is like very gender balanced, like this would be agriculture, life science, physical science, math, statistics. Some of them are higher earnings, but a lot are not. So there are some papers that now highlight that what we should really care about is women's and underrepresentation in what they call GEMs, like not STEM, because women are actually not like underrepresented in the life sciences, for instance. Now, going to your second question, well, we do have a limitation that because this is an RD, we have to like group. If not, you get like, we're kind of trying to do that in a different paper, but it's difficult to get an estimate for every specific program. I can show you like what happens if you use different fallbacks, but here HES is still aggregated. We see that these degrees tend to be like very similar in terms of earnings. And here is the effect that you find. Now, if you look at the effect of going into TE versus TE, you get no effect. This would be the effect of being admitted into a more selective option in technology and engineering. It really does not make a difference. What really matters is the field. You see a small positive effect with respect to science for men, and no effect between health and business. So if health and business were your fallback, because these are also high earnings. So yeah, it's something we've struggled with a lot, is that you have a lot of combinations. You can also not do it like program by program, because you start losing like a lot of observations. But yeah, it's a good point.
Could you please repeat the name you said for science, James, you said?
Yeah, I know there's a paper by Khan, and I can send it later, but
Okay.
they sort of, when they go into this women's underrepresentation in STEM, they highlight this idea that actually we should be more specific, and where women are really underrepresented is in technology, math, and physical science.
Okay.
But life science is actually more female dominated, like chemistry, biology.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. So, Josefa, Yes, sure.
Sorry, because it's very interesting. So, at some point at your presentation, you mentioned the public sector. So in these results, you are isolating the public sector. I mean, there is no women employed in engineering, for instance, that works in public sector.
No, we do include the public sector. It's just that, so in fact, here we have the public sector. We only have data for the public sector for 2018 and 19. So all of the results I show are what are earnings for these individuals in 2018 and 19. Now,
okay.
These estimates are missing the public, like if you want to look at them like 10 years, or then we need like a larger time frame. And here we don't always have the data for the public sector,
Okay.
which is why we show that results are the same, but we think our best result is using information from the public sector.
Okay.
If we were to look at a specific age, then we would need to see some people in 2010, 12, and then we don't always have good data for the public sector.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, of course.
First of all, it was very, very interesting and nice to hear you. I think your paper is wonderful and it's very interesting methodology. Do you have the paper ready to share?
Yes, it should be on my website.
Okay,
I'll make sure
great.
it is. But
Great.
yes, we're now we just submitted the paper, so we're waiting for the response, but we're kind of at that stage already.
Okay, great. But I would like to ask you something about your final comment about what it's possible to make or to think about to reduce this kind of effect on women in the labor market. Do you really think it is possible to think something like some measure to make this environment more suitable for women? What do you think? What do you think about this point?
Yeah, well, this is a huge point. It's kind of what we're trying to get at now. What are some of the barriers and how do you overcome them? I do like a lot the research by Claudia Goldin, and I think she makes a very interesting point in how some occupations have become more female friendly, and that has a lot to do with flexibility. So I think they analyzed the case of pharmacists, but if you see any occupation that starts to change the rules, and that could come in two directions. Sometimes something happens, like with the pharmacists, that I think it had to do more with what happened in the sector, that it made it a more flexible occupation and women started going there. Now, sometimes it could also be that you have more women, for instance, in health. This has happened among doctors, like pediatricians. You start to have more women in a discipline and they start changing the rules. So I think it's interesting if we can step by step start changing some of the rules. I think technology could help a lot. Actually, Claudia Goldin talks about, and this is an important point, she highlights technology and engineering as a discipline that could be very friendly for women, because she says this is a very flexible occupation. I don't find that in my data, but I think it has to do with the fact that I'm looking at the Chilean study. Engineers in Chile, a lot of them work in mining or construction, so they are not really programmers, and I think that could be a venue where it's much easier for women to get through. But that's a huge topic. I think it's really interesting to see like how we have these jobs that are organized in such a way that when you work there, and this happens also in business and law, like at a very high level, that you have to be like it's a 24/7 job. And that means that if you have children, someone has to take care of children. That's typically the woman. But hopefully we wouldn't have those kind of jobs that require someone to take all of the child penalty. Now, how do we really change those rules? That's a big question. We have a second paper that looks at peers. It's like, I think we would need much more than that, but it seems that female peers are very important in this setting. So if you go into a program with better female peers, that increases your probability of graduating, and some recent papers suggest that sort of this group of females could help you navigate this male-dominated environment, and they could be really helpful. So I think that's also interesting.
Yeah, thank you. Very good answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, Josefa, for your presentation. Very nice working paper. Congratulations.
Thank you, Lorena. It was really nice to meet everyone. So thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Thank you very
Hope to
much.
see everyone again.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
So bye-bye, everyone. See you all in 2 weeks.